iPhone designer Jony Ive has confirmed that he is working with Sam Altman on a new AI hardware device. When AI Mania hit in the wake of ChatGPT's release in November of 2022, all of the big tech companies lined up to get a piece of the action. Google, of course, had been there for a while, being up until ChatGPT launched the sort of default leader in artificial intelligence. They had acquired DeepMind years earlier, and were broadly perceived as the company that would bring AI to the mainstream, even though it wasn't actually them in the end that did that. Microsoft, of course, had saddled its wagon to ChatGPT and OpenAI itself. Its aggressive moves in the space paid off early, making it a major contender right out of the gate, rather than just some also-ran or secondary player. Meta would end up taking an interesting and perhaps surprising place in the AI ranks, as it decided to become the leader in open source and the strongest advocate for open source AI. Amazon, who had originally been scheduled to release a generative AI play around the same time as ChatGPT, upon seeing the capabilities of ChatGPT, decided to scrap that announcement and instead focus on their business solution, where they would become a one-stop shop for businesses to integrate lots of different models. Point being that throughout 2023 and into 2024, all of the big tech companies were figuring out their place in the AI fight. The one huge notable exception was, of course, Apple. Apple hung back. CEO Tim Cook would at most acknowledge that AI was going to be an important thing without really getting into what they did. And on the one hand, people were broadly accepting that Apple tends not to be the first, they tend to be the best, and they assumed that at some point Apple would get in the game. Earlier this year, of course, we finally started to get a peek of what that would look like. Apple announced Apple Intelligence because, of course, they couldn't just call it artificial intelligence. And the place that it seemed to take was AI for normies. They wanted to integrate specific AI applications onto the iPhone and other devices in a way that didn't risk or compromise your personal data, and did things that were actually useful. It was a bummer then, when almost immediately after that announcement, Apple had to walk back the intended release date and disconnect it from the iPhone 16 launch, which happened, of course, this month in September. Now, since then, a lot of the conversation has been around what it means that Apple wasn't able to get Apple Intelligence onto this phone for its release. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman wrote, Apple's new iPhone 16 reflects a slowing pace of innovation. He writes, the new iPhone has tantalizing camera improvements, but the device is emblematic of Apple's slower pace of hardware innovation. And throughout the piece, he talks about how initially, each iteration of the Apple iPhone tended to reflect a significant update. Inevitably, over time, that started to slow down. Gurman writes, over the 17-year history of the iPhone, I count 6 genuinely new hardware designs. iPhone 3G in 2008, the iPhone 4 in 2010, the iPhone 5 in 2012, the iPhone 6 in 2014, and then we wouldn't get another one until the iPhone X in 2017, and the iPhone 12 in 2020. He writes, by the launch of iPhone X in 2017, Apple had moved to a 3-year design cycle. Back then, that extra year of development made sense. The iPhone X was a gigantic upgrade with its ground-up redesign, Face ID, and other new software. But after that, the redesign lag got even lengthier. Apple now appears to be working on a half-decade-long cycle. For better or worse, the iPhone 16 has a nearly identical look and feel as the iPhone 12. Apple has added a lot of other features between 2020 and 2024, but it's undeniable that the days of frequent hardware changes are over. Now, of course, the relevant context for this is that it's not just Apple Intelligence, which seems to be moving more slowly than people's perceptions of what Apple innovation should. However, this is where it gets interesting and relevant for our story today. Gurman continues, for a company looking to prove that it still has design chops, now that most of Jony Ive's vaunted team has left the building, the lack of major overhauls in recent years is notable. Ive left Apple in 2019, but remained a consultant for a few years afterward. So it's very likely that we haven't yet seen a major new Apple product that he wasn't involved with, at least to some extent. Of course, Gurman concludes with the fact that in the absence of hardware innovation, Apple has focused on Apple Intelligence. He writes, where Apple is being a little disingenuous with its marketing, the company claims the iPhone 16 is the first model built from the ground up for Apple Intelligence. The reality is that the processor and other hardware in the new iPhones isn't meaningfully better for AI. If Apple felt that hardware changes were enough of a selling point, it would have focused its marketing pitch around those features. Instead, it has zeroed in on Apple Intelligence in spite of the drawbacks. Most consumers won't have access to the software for weeks, with some features not coming until next year, and it's still nowhere near as capable as rival AI systems, even if all of Apple Intelligence was available today. There's little here that makes these iPhones a must-buy. All right, so hold on to that for a minute, and remember the question is Apple innovation in the context of a post-Jony Ive world. To round out the Apple Intelligence story for the sake of completeness, there are some reports coming out today that Apple is trying to push the pedal to the metal, with Macworld writing Apple Intelligence's best features may be coming sooner than we think. Apple is apparently working to complete the development of iOS 18.3 by the end of the year for a January release, which would see most of the major Apple Intelligence features coming. It also potentially includes some Siri features which were originally slated for iOS 18.4, which isn't set to come until March. So Apple Intelligence will be here, slower than we'd like, but maybe faster than we think. But the interesting piece is this question about Jony Ive. Jony Ive has now been gone from Apple for 5 years. He was, of course, the original designer of the iPhone, and now he is getting into the AI hardware game. The New York Times wrote a long piece about Ive this weekend. The first part talks about what he's been doing since he left Apple, quietly building up $90 million worth of real estate in San Francisco. But the more interesting thing, I think, to this audience will be what he has been working on. At his firm LoveFrom, the team there has 3 areas. Work for clients, including companies like Airbnb and Ferrari, work for the love of it, which they do without pay, and work for themselves, which has included, for example, building renovation in all of that real estate. Note that the clients are not small deals. The Times writes that these clients pay LoveFrom as much as $200 million annually. One of those clients, as you heard, is Airbnb, which came in directly through Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky. The Times writes LoveFrom helped redesign the travel company's review system, introduced 3-dimensional icons to its app, and develop a concept called travel postcards, which led to the company's introduction of icons, destination properties including a replica of the X-Men mansions that people can rent. However, that's not the part that's interesting. The Times also writes, Mr. Chesky is a close friend of Sam Altman, whose company OpenAI has been at the forefront of building generative artificial intelligence. Last year, Mr. Chesky arranged for Mr. Ive and Mr. Altman to meet for dinner. At a Michelin-starred restaurant, Spruce, a few miles from Jackson Square, Mr. Altman and Mr. Ive talked about how generative AI made it possible to create a new computing device because the technology could do more for users than traditional software, since it could summarize and prioritize messages, identify and name objects like plants, and eventually field complex requests like booking travel. Mr. Ive and Mr. Altman met for dinner several more times before agreeing to build a product, with LoveFrom leading the design. They have raised money privately with Mr. Ive and Emerson Collective, which is Lorraine Powell Jobs' funding arm, contributing and could raise up to $1 billion in startup funding by the end of the year. The company that they are building has hired about 10 employees at this point, including, writes the Times, Tang Tan, who oversaw iPhone product development, and Evans Hankey, who succeeded Mr. Ive in leading design at Apple. While the project is being developed in secret, and there are still big open questions about what the product would be, to say nothing of when it would be released, the idea apparently is a, quote, product that uses AI to create a computing experience that is less socially disruptive than the iPhone. Presumably this means a hardware device that allows you to interact with your digital world with less disruption to how you're interacting with the physical world. A technology experience that's not mediated by pulling something out of your pocket and hunching down staring at a screen. So what's notable about this? Well, first of all, this is just an acknowledgement that this is actually happening. Several months ago, we got rumors about this, although they came at a time when Altman was being critiqued for doing too many extracurriculars outside of OpenAI. We still don't have details exactly on how much this is an OpenAI project versus a separate company versus something incubated. However, it does appear that it's happening. Second, in addition to confirmation, we also got some sense of the scale. The fact that the company may raise $1 billion this year suggests that they're playing at something significant. Beyond that, we're still in the realm of speculation. But to the extent that one believes that for all of the benefits that digital technology has created, one of the challenges is the interface, which drags us away from our physical and real-life experiences, there could be something pretty powerful here. One of potentially the positive legacies of artificial intelligence. And so I think for now, what this really is catnip for the excited, and a lure, an inducement to want to hear and see more. For now, though, that is going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief. Until next time, peace